In this video, we're going to be talking about for loops and while loops. So first, let's start with for loops. The idea of for loop is that it runs for a certain number of times. So for, the first part of this is int I equals 0. So we are initializing a variable I with the value 0. And then we're saying until I is less than, let's say 5. So whatever value you put here is how many times you want this for loop to run. So int I equals 0, and while I is less than 5, plus plus I. So what I does, or what plus plus I does, is it increases the value of I by 1. So what we're doing is every time that the for loop runs, the value of I increases by 1 until it's less than 5. So the moment I becomes 5, it no longer fits this case, so it doesn't run again. So for I, so let's do cout test. So this should print test 5 times now. One, two, three, four, 5. 5 times. It's as simple as that. Now let's talk about while loops. So while for loops run for a certain number of times, while loops run while a certain case is true. So I'm going to make a variable. So int num1 equals 5. So I'm going to say while num1 is not equal to 5. So this exclamation equal symbol set means not equal to. So we know that this means equal to. So this is not equal to. So while num is not equal to 5, so I'm going to go ahead and make this 6. So 6 is not equal to 5, so it's going to run. And then let's say cout test. And then we're going to subtract the value of num. So let's say num equals num1 minus 1. So we're saving that variable back in itself after we subtract 1. This can also be done by saying num1 minus minus. So that decreases the value by 1. So I'm just going to comment this out before we run it. So compile and run. So it runs it once. Let's say we made this 7. So it's not equal to 5, so it's gonna run. Then it's gonna do minus 1, so that's 6, which is still not equal to 5, so it's gonna run a second time, and then minus 1, 5. So it's gonna be equal to 5. So this case will become false. Perfect, it runs 2 times. So that's for loops and while loops. An important thing to keep in mind when talking about for loops and while loops is something called variable scope. So this variable that I put right, int num equals 1. This is a global variable because this variable is outside the while loop. I'm going to comment this out for the time being. And since this variable is outside the while loop, it can also be accessed inside the while loop, right? That's called global scope. Next is something called local scope. So let's say I made a variable int test var equals 5. Okay, and let's say I wanted to make test var now equal to 4. Okay, and I'll print out test var. And then let's just get rid of this for now, just to simplify things. So what do you think is going to happen here? Let's run this and find out. Test var cannot be defined here, because since it was declared inside the while loop, this variable can only be accessed inside the while loop. It can't be accessed outside. So that's why we get an error. So let's say we did temp var here then. Now, since temp var is global and the equal statement is also on the same scope as test var, now it should work. Perfect. Now we can see that it works. Variable scope is something to keep in mind when you move on to bigger challenges and higher level coding. This is the end of Intro to Coding in C++. Make sure to do the challenges and practice what you've learned so far. We'll meet again in the intermediate course.